Yeah, so hey everyone, thanks for coming to this panel. My name is Peter McChrystal. We're going to talk today about the future of AI and ML in the insurance industry specifically, but we might get into some other topics in general where we think that artificial intelligence and machine learning is going, things that we've seen trends come up, and where the challenges that we see coming, the future, and I think towards the end we'll get into some really cool future stuff as well. So. We'll just do a few introductions. My name is Peter McChrystal. I've been with Allstate now for I'm relatively new to the company. I've only been here about 4 or 5 months, which is going to help, I think, because a lot of these guys have done work that I've actually never heard of as well. So I'll be like you guys in that way, and I'm going to ask a lot of questions. So yeah, I'm really interested to hear what the guys have to say, and I think it's going to be a good discussion and a free-flowing one, just of what the type of stuff that we've all worked on here in the past and currently, some of the stuff that we've implemented, and where we see it going in future projects and stuff even further into the future. So yeah, I'll let the guys introduce themselves. Neve, do you want to go?
Thanks. Hello, I'm Neve, and I'm a data scientist in the Allstate in the team called D3, which is the data science research team at Allstate. So I've been at Allstate for 5 years now, and I specialise in the area of claims fraud. And I joined from a research collaboration between Allstate and the School of Computer Science at Queen's.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming along. So my name is Brendan Doherty. I'm a machine learning engineer with an AI COE at Allstate. At Allstate now about 2.5 years. I've worked on a number of projects rolling out ML products for our law and regulation team. I've also worked on some NLP and audio processing projects, basically trying to understand our customers better and ultimately trying to deliver a better customer experience. Previous to Allstate, I worked for a life insurer, probably about more traditional machine learning projects like recommendation systems, fraud detection, and accelerated underwriting. I'm a bit of a jack of all trades. Peter might say I'm a master of none, but...
Hi everyone, my name is Pat O'Reilly. I am an AI security architect, and my role is really as the job title would suggest, I work at the intersection of AI and security at Allstate. So that includes things like how do we secure our AI applications in production, but also getting into areas such as how do we use AI to secure the enterprise, and even things like looking further ahead, like how will we continue to protect Allstate against increasingly sophisticated attacks, including those using AI. So I'm relatively new into this role, and in my past I was a data scientist developing many of the models that Allstate use in production today, and then in between I worked as a DevOps engineer as well.
Hey everyone, my name is Dean Corey. I'm Director of Data Science at Allstate Northern Ireland. I have mainly worked in product development for the Allstate company, so our auto insurance and home insurance products, trying to evolve those, take them into the next generation. So topics like telematics, sensors in cars, connected home, sensors in the home, aerial imaging, and how we're building the next generation of product. I'm really excited to talk about some of that stuff today.
That's great. Thanks so much, folks. And I've just realized that I didn't tell much of you guys about myself. So I've been here now for a few months, but before that, I primarily worked in computer vision models in machine learning. In my last company, it was a company dedicated to facial recognition. So that taught me a lot about deep learning, cloud computing, and facial recognition, obviously, image processing, all these things, the ethics that go along with that, and the privacy as well. So it was a great way for me to learn about deep learning, and that's what I've now taken into Allstate, and I'm working a lot on the computer vision models here as well. And before that, I actually worked with Brendan back in Letterkenny for a life insurance company, so he actually wrote me back into this job. So but I'm still here, so it must be pretty good. So yeah, just to start off, what I think is going to be a good way to give you guys a feel for the industry and for insurance using machine learning is just for us to go through a few projects that we've all worked on, the impact that they've had, how new they are, and how it's actually changed how insurance is priced, how it's given, and the customer experience that goes along with that. So I'll just give a wee short project that I've worked on in my time. It's a computer vision model. As I said, that's what I sort of specialize in, and it's a model that is meant for a customer when they're in an accident, say, with their car, and for if they want to make a claim. Here in the UK and Ireland, we obviously, if you make a claim, you have to give your the license plate of your number, for example. In the States, that's not a unique identifier the way it is here. So they actually go by the vehicle identification number, which is a number that all cars have. You might not even know yourself, but your car does have it. I recognized mine recently, and I was like, I've never seen that before. But now I know what they look like. So it's a 17-digit character that's usually underneath the windscreen. And it's very long. It's alphanumeric. It's sort of all over the place, and you couldn't memorize it the way you do with a number plate. So we developed a model where you can take a photo of the VIN with your smartphone through the app. It sends it up to us in the back end, and our model analyzes it, does the character detection on it, and then provides that back to your claim. So that's obviously all about, like Brendan was saying, customer satisfaction, making that process. That's obviously a very hard process if you've gone through an accident, just to make it that little bit easier, so that you don't have to sit there and find it, and it can be sometimes it's underneath the windscreen, sometimes it's on the car door. So that's had a big impact, obviously, on users, and it's just another way that we're trying to use AI more to just make the customer experience that little bit nicer and streamlined, rather than making huge changes to products or pricing. So yeah, that's just a bit of a background on the project that I've been working on. So Neve, I know that you said you worked in fraud analytics and prevention. So can you tell us a bit more about that? Like, what type of fraud have you worked on, and sort of what is the type of fraud you see in Allstate, and how has ML helped that?
Yeah, that's grand. So we recently established a fraud COE at Allstate. But during my time, I've mainly specialised in claims like fraud. So looking at things like predictive, like models, graph analytics, NLP, so natural language like processing. So we try to predict which of those claims is most likely to be like fraudulent. Because in the US, legally, we can't deem something as fraud until we have like a human go through, read the facts of like that claim. So there's also that like prioritization element, which is like vitally important when we've got an insurance company the size of Allstate, when we have like loads and loads of claims coming in the door every day.
And what type of fraudulent claims would you see? Like a typical kind of example? Is it faking an accident, or pretending it got stolen, or what type of fraud would it be?
So we have lots of different like types. So we have like hard like fraud is when somebody intentionally comes to Allstate for the sole purpose of being fraudulent. And then we also look for like soft like fraud. So maybe you've taken like chanced your arm, you've had like somebody stolen your TV, and you've claimed for like a larger TV. So a variety of different like things.
Okay, that makes sense. So you talked about the different techniques that you use. So graph databases was one that you talked about, and that's a really cool topic in machine learning, and it's relatively new. Like even I haven't really dealt with them much. So can you tell us a bit like how graph databases are used? I know that the main example that I've always think of graph databases is what Google does with their Google search, and how, whenever you search for something, you find like the entity comes up there and then it gives you information about it on the side, and maybe different things that it's related to, which is all powered by graph databases. So how is that used for fraud?
Yeah, so a graph database, well, I guess like as data scientists, a lot of the data that we would use is kind of like in table like format. And a graph database is just a different way of organizing that data. So we look at more of the relationships between how that data is joined up. So if we take, for example, like people, we can join people together by like where they live, email addresses, and their phone like numbers. So in terms of like fraud, there are certain like relationships that we might think are interesting. So maybe you've got the same like postal address of somebody who's committed fraud at the past. You've got the same email address. There are also other things. So in the US, we know medicine is like privatized. We can see things like maybe a doctor is doing something illegal. They're paying like a car garage for that garage to then I guess, recommend that their customers go and use that doctor's like surgery. So look for like a legal activity like that can also be found in a graph database.
That's interesting. And within the graph, do you have relationships between actual people, like if they're related to each other, like by family, or is that something that isn't really touched?
So we can see different things like that. A graph database can like highlight those different relationships as well.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So you also talked about NLP, which is obviously a massive part of machine learning at the minute and artificial intelligence. And so what type of fraud does it help solve? Maybe that graph databases don't, or maybe there's a crossover, but what does NLP really help solve in that case?
Yes, so if you're not sure, NLP just stands for natural language processing, and it's fancy terminology for saying that we're going to analyze text data, or we want to extract like information. So we have a lot of NLP projects at Allstate at the minute. For fraud, something that we think is interesting is we have claims adjusters, and they write notes, like their train of thought as they work through like a claim, answering questions for that customer. We want to like analyze those notes to see if there's anything of interest in terms of fraud. So what we do is we run a word embedding like algorithm, which is an NLP like technique, and figure out like which words and phrases that claims adjuster is using. Do they link back to fraudulent like words? So we can find things like spelling mistakes, also like lingo, maybe shorthand that the claims adjuster has like written. And that means in their notes, if a claims adjuster writes, I think there's something suspicious going on here, I'm not too sure, we can pull out that like word suspicious and then continually monitor that claim like in the background just to make sure that we're not paying out like loads and loads of money before we follow up on that additional information. And then maybe like the claims adjuster comes back the next day and they're like, oh, false alert, and they write like NF, which means like not fraud. And then we just know to deprioritize it like false alarm. We shouldn't be panicking.
Excellent. No, well, that's really interesting. So I meant to say it at the start, but if we're going to try and put a little section at the end for questions. So if you have any questions about what we're talking about, feel free to sort of store them in your head, and we'll ask if there's time. That's amazing, Neve. Thanks. So next we'll go on to Brendan. And so, as I said, we used to work in life insurance, and we actually have a really good panel here with lots of different experience. So I think it makes sense maybe for you to talk us through a bit of the life insurance, which is obviously quite a bit different. You might think that there's crossovers, but life is a completely different sort of ball game to car insurance or even homes. So what about life insurance in terms of sort of ML and what that impact has been, Brendan?
Yeah, so I would say, like, in general, if you think about how old life insurance industry is, it's probably over 500 years old. And a lot of the innovation and disruption has really come in the last 10 or 15 years, just because of, like, the digital revolution. I would say, like, machine learning has probably come to that party a bit later on, maybe in the last 5 to 10 years, mostly. It's really been driving change through some of the technologies that Neve talked about, like computer vision, predictive analytics, NLP, and audio and signal processing as well. So if you think about ML's probably impacting everywhere throughout the insurance value chain. And you can see that everywhere. You can see it in chatbots, you can see it in targeted marketing campaigns, which are all driven by AI in the background. And something Peter talked about earlier as well was that companies are now starting to really identify that it's customer experience, not just the new products that they're bringing out, that's going to be a big differentiator in the marketplace. And just going back even 5 years in life insurance, there was a really painful part in the entire process, and that was the underwriting process. So just looking back, it was a really cumbersome process. It had high touch points. So for example, the entire process of underwriting, so you had to basically how you price a customer out, is that a person had to fill out their application form. They'd have to get medical exams done. They might have to give blood samples, for example. And all that data was collated together with application level information. That was then passed in underwriter, and the underwriter would review that and basically assess how risky that customer is, and that would ultimately result in the price they received. And that could stretch out for 90 days. And that was one of the big breakthroughs, I would say, in the life insurance space, is trying to streamline that process down.
100%, yeah, and we know as well, from working on that it's not, obviously it saves the company money, because the way that it worked was that the company would actually have to pay for the test. It wasn't paid for by the individual, so you save money as a company by not having to send people to the test, the people that didn't need it. Because a lot of these people are just healthy people who just need life insurance for a house or something like that. And they have no need to go and get their bloods taken or whatever. So, but it was also just the time, right? The time went from weeks or longer to instant.
Yeah, I think there was like a couple of benefits to it. So you had like that time element. You can shrink that down from like 90 days to instant if you really wanted to do it. And then there was that customer experience side. So you're kind of thinking the customers, if you apply for life insurance and you have to go and get a brain scan and give bloods, and another life insurer doesn't require that, you're probably going to go to the one that doesn't require it. I think that impacts the bottom line.
And what type of ML was mostly used for that process? I know we've talked about NLP and all these other more AI-centric techniques, but this was a bit more on the traditional side.
I think like if you look around, what most life insurers are doing in that space is they're using things like gradient boosted machines. XEBoost is probably the most recent one coming out there. But if you think about how the model would actually be set up, you've all these years of historical underwriting decisions, and those decisions were made on the lab tests and the application information. If you do away with those lab tests, you can no longer make a really good decision on it. So what the solution to that is, people start pulling in third-party information. It could be information from RX information, like pharmaceutical information. It could be MVR records. It could be criminal history. And you can model that up based on the historical underwriting decisions.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so probably two questions. One, like a bit more current one. Obviously, we're still in the middle, or at the end, hopefully, of a pandemic, a global pandemic, which has obviously had a massive impact on people's mortality. So what has that done, do you think, to these models, right? Like it's something that we could never have modeled before. It can't be in our data. So, what has been the impact of that, and how do you think these companies can now, we're not in them anymore, but how do you think they can adapt or change or, due to these models that are all built on historic data?
So I think that the overall idea of COVID is probably like somewhat of like a double-edged sword at the minute for insurers, whether that's life or auto or home. You're probably having like a ton of change in customer behaviours. So it might be impacting things like lapse, for example, or retention. That all feed into all different types of models. In terms of like the underwriting space, or even if you look at things like what the actuaries are trying to do at the minute, they're starting to adopt more machine learning techniques. Looking forward into the future, they're probably going to be looking at things like wearables, similar to what they do for telematics. If you're thinking about what they're actually trying to achieve, the actuaries is like, I suppose their like golden egg is trying to predict mortality at a really fine-grained level, so they can give really good predictions. If you're trying to do that on data over COVID, it's obviously going to present a ton of different problems, because you're kind of expecting what you've seen in the past is what you'll see in the future. So it could be a case that you might have to throw away that data for modeling in the future if things return back to some kind of normality. There's probably other things as well you might need to work with, like in any predictive model you build, there's going to be a layer of assumptions on there as well. One example would be if you're forecasting on the future, what your profit and loss might add on something like a mortality improvement factor. So an easy way to think about it is that a 60-year-old alive in 1995 is probably going to have the same life outcome as a 60-year-old in 2005. So we're probably thinking that during that time period, the standard of life has improved, people will live longer. It might be the case that the assumptions on the actuaries make, for example, might actually change as far as like mortality improvement is.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and the actuarial science is definitely one that is seeing that transformation in AI too. Like it's a part of their courses now, and I'm sure there's still a lot of ways to go there. So definitely a big place where AI is going to, and ML is going to make an even bigger impact. So now we'll move on to Pat. Pat has recently, actually, to my knowledge, has changed roles recently. So like you said, you've gone from more of a ML development now into an AI security role. So this is really interesting for me too, like, because in my last company, it was all built on cloud infrastructure, and we had to deploy our ML applications to the cloud. It was all through AWS. We actually used AWS's built-in security features to secure our applications, but you're kind of just trusting what they're doing, right? So can you tell us a bit of, in that space, since you've been there, what are the dangers to AI applications, and how can it be mitigated? Or
Yeah, you're absolutely right. AI brings huge potential to any company, but it also brings its own unique security considerations. And in particular, in insurance, our customers trust us with a lot of their most sensitive data. That's the data that we need to protect them, to pay their medical claims, and so on and so forth. And so like we take it as our highest priority to protect that data as part of that. And with that, when we're using AI, across the whole AI life cycle, there's just multiple issues that you need to consider when it comes to security. And so it starts very much, I think, at acquisition of data and acquisition even of pre-trained open source models. So that's a pretty common practice in AI in industry, not just in insurance. And researchers, interestingly, were able to show that a concept that they refer to as data poisoning, they could manipulate an open source data set in such a way that it could actually create a backdoor in a trained model where they would be able to trigger certain results of that model. So if you think of a situation like where we're using that model to detect fraud, it's a great example where, you know, some attacker might try to manipulate and use that as an attack vector so that they could then, further on down the line, when that model's in production, defraud Allstate. Another one is even just pre-trained models. I learned relatively recently that TensorFlow, when you use a pre-trained model in TensorFlow, it actually can include arbitrary executable code. So TensorFlow is a huge, huge project, and they've built in so many features, and they have this concept of a lambda layer in the model, and that can do anything from run a shell script, run arbitrary Python code. So I think the lesson with that is just be very careful, use a lot of caution when you're using, you know, these open data sets and pre-trained models. You know, where possible, use them from well-established sources. And it's always a trade-off because, you know, data scientists are at the cutting edge always. They're reading blog posts, they're saying, okay, I've found this great data, I found this pre-trained model, but it's always good to exercise some caution, you know, before those are being brought in-house.
Yeah, and it makes sense. Like, we don't think about it, and we, you know, back in the day, you would have to use SAS or these that are paid, right? Like, Python is completely free, TensorFlow, all these libraries are completely open source, supported by the community. So, like, we like to think that everybody is a good guy and a good girl, but nobody, you know, some people aren't, right? And they have malicious, you know, intent, and they can just push something up to pip, they can push it up to wherever, and next thing you've got something. So it's a really good point that we don't really think of at the minute, but I'm sure you're thinking about it now.
Very much so. With, you know, third-party packages is a great example. It's been well documented in recent years. Attack that as an attack vector. You know, typo squatting is one, where similarly named packages, or even dependency confusion is another one, where again, it's another way for attackers to get their malicious code inside your network. And there are ways to defend against that. You know, you can block direct access to things like PyPI and instead have an internal mirror inside your company where you're running your malware scans, and that's really the best practice. And of course, that's what we're doing inside Allstate.
Yeah, 100%, and it makes it worth those like annoying checks. They are worth something. I was in the opposite of my startup. It was like you just do anything, but I'm sure it'll come back to bite them at some point. Your other side is more around actually using AI to secure applications and customers and data and, you know, the company. So can you tell us a bit? That's kind of the other side, which is like is very interesting as well. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think looking forward, the big one we're going to see is something we'll probably all be glad of, but it will be the end of passwords and the, you know, increasing normalization of biometric authentication. You know, many large companies are already there when it comes to user authentication. So I think Microsoft recently announced that for their end users, if you're using Xbox or anything, you can go completely passwordless. And indeed, I believe inside Microsoft Corporation, they're fully passwordless now. So it's all done via, you know, multi-factor authentication using things like fingerprints. I think going further down the line, we're going to see increasing use of, you know, facial recognition, voice. But again, with all of this, it brings new attack vectors too, because everyone's probably seen the deep fakes on YouTube. And so as the technology evolves on the securing the enterprise side, technology is also evolving on the attack side. So it's going to be an interesting space. I think the work will never be done. You know, and Neve probably can tell you about this too. It's similar in fraud. You know, as you close down certain loopholes in fraud, the fraudsters find new avenues that are not being as carefully watched. And so, yeah, a constantly evolving space, really.
That's yeah, it's super interesting, and I'll be excited to hear more about it over the coming months and years. So thanks for that. So Dean on the end here, he's our director of data science in Allstate. So you've also recently moved teams, Dean, and you're getting more into the side now of using aerial photography and image processing, again computer vision, in order to, you know, and then be able to use ML to do cool things with these images and to improve the experience of the customer. So can you tell us a bit about where you have been in that space and what it's been like and the innovations that'll be coming?
Yeah, I'd be very happy to talk about that. Thanks everyone for coming to a 45-minute talk about insurance. Really appreciate you giving it a chance. I'm sure a lot of people don't think it's the most exciting topic, but honestly, if you're into machine learning and you're into predictive methods, like it really is a great area. There's a ton of problems to solve in here, and like really the price of your insurance was one of the original predictive problems. I'm really kind of building a lot of the expertise we learned there. And yeah, I just got to say, I could sit through a whole talk about security loopholes.
I'm like holding myself back from questions. I'm just saying.
Just a thought for future. So yeah, I'd be very much happy to talk about one of my current projects, which is around the use of aerial photography and how that could be used by an insurance company. So this aerial photography is easily kind of available. There's plenty of companies that sell it. You can there's satellite imagery, there is imagery from fixed wing aircraft that just constantly fly and take photos. If you've been on Google Maps, you can zoom in and most people have probably looked at their house at some point on that. Like that information is out there and it can be purchased and used by companies. So it is something we're interested in. How could that potentially be used by us? There's also drone imagery, I should say. It's possible to get very high resolution stuff there. It's not something that we're particularly interested in because it's expensive. And you always have to weigh out like the cost benefit of a lot of these things. So we're more interested in like the more lower res aircraft imagery, kind of cheaper available stuff right now. But if you're I think home insurance, at least in the US, I don't really know much about the UK. I've never actually bought home insurance. But in the US, it has a really big problem. And their industry is very different from ours. They have a ton of they seem to have like a wildfire or a tornado like every week, or a blizzard or something, right? It's constant, like home insurance is really, really important out there. And it's actually required for most people if they have a mortgage. It's actually required to have your house insured. So a lot of people will go, maybe they've bought their house, maybe they get their mortgage approved and they get home or whatever, and then they get a letter saying, you have to have home insurance. You have to go and buy home insurance. So they get on the phone to Allstate or whoever they choose, and they're like, okay, who are you? Where do you live? What square foot is your home? Some people know that, some people don't. Some people don't know the square foot of the home. They don't know it off the top of their head. It's not particularly easy to measure yourself. So they have to go and maybe find the documents to get that. That's an annoying experience as a customer, right? How many floors does your house have? What's your roof made out of? When was the last time the roof was repaired? How far away is the pool from your... you have to go through an exam about your house, in order just to buy insurance from that, right? We have records of it taking people over 3 hours to get through this on the phone, right? That's terrible, right? I don't want that. I don't want that to be the experience that my company has. I really, really don't. So, what if it's possible to get photos of the house such that we have a pretty good idea of the size of the house? We can actually tell, what the walls, what the roof's made out of. We can actually look at damage on the roof. If you've got a pool, how far away is it? Do you have a trampoline? That's also another thing we care about. Do you have trees? That sort of thing. Maybe we can get a pretty good idea of this sort of stuff before the customer even calls us, to help them through that process. That's one potential use for this. It's the one I'm probably most excited about. What if we could just say, is this you? And just here's the information. Is this you? Just say yes. And if so, here's your house insurance. And that's it. I feel like that would be an experience that people want to have these days when you're used to buying stuff in one click. I feel like that would be a better way. I think people would be happier. Get just 3 hours of your life back. I think people would be very happy with that.
Yeah, no, and it makes a lot of sense. And so, what about the sort of, you sort of touched on it there, the privacy side of it that people might be concerned about, right? If you think about it from a user's perspective of, my insurance company is taking pictures of my house, and obviously they're not taking just your house, they're using third-party data, but that's kind of what it seems like. What is the method behind, to mitigate those worries and to say, like, this isn't creepy, we're not looking at you in your garden, this is just, we're using it for very sort of just to make life a bit easier for you?
Totally understand that. There's a really strong focus on data privacy now more than the past. Really, a lot of the new advances we're trying to make, whether it be in home insurance or car insurance or in black box car insurance, stuff like that. People don't like us knowing where they drive. I totally get that. And you might even have a comment here with your photos of the VIN of the car. What if someone's credit card's in the photo? Like, what if, you don't know, right? You don't know what they're going to send, and we don't know necessarily what's going to be in the photos that we get from the airplane instead. So, we have undertaken this huge effort to build this kind of unstructured data platform where, as much as possible, we don't need to actually look at the images, right? There's really, if we can probably build this in such a way that we don't need to look at the images, maybe there's an error or something, we can have a select few people look at it for data quality issues or something like that. Or maybe in the building of these algorithms, someone's maybe going to have to look at things, but in the actual operation of this, for the most part, we can hide a lot of the information from employees. And we try to do that as much as possible. I mean, you can probably talk about efforts to maybe even identify other numbers or other information in the picture and blur that out, but
Yeah, and it is a concern that people have. It's just any photo that's taken of their own property or their own thing. It can be a bit of a point, but the only thing you can do is keep it hands off, delete images obviously when you can, things like that. In my last company, it was a facial recognition company, and we had the same problems, and we made the efforts to never save the images. Once we processed them, it was a variable that got overwritten every single time with the next image. You couldn't, they were encrypted, obviously, all the rest, and that's kind of all you can do. And you just, but then you do get into things like, well, go on to Google Maps and you can find your own house. Like, it's kind of the world we live in right now, where you have to be as careful as you can, and it's your own line to draw. But there's just images everywhere. There's drones everywhere. So
ultimately, as an insurance company, we're going to need information about the people that we insure in order to just do it, right? We're going to need a certain amount of information to be order to decide that we want to sell them insurance, and then what price that insurance is.
And you're using the images right for more than just the square footage. It's for things like fires, natural disasters that might actually be able to help people with the analysis.
Right now, a big topic is wildfire. In the US, they've just had three once in a lifetime years in a row of wildfire. So we're getting a lot of questions. What do we do? Is next year going to be the same? It's very, very tough, obviously, questions to answer. Aerial images help, right? So we're looking to say, right, what can we do to understand vegetation levels near properties? Can we even tell from the color of plants, the dryness, or is there ways to detect risk of wildfire in the area and communicate that to the customers, because they can actually take steps themselves. You can get sprinkler systems. There's coating people can buy and spray their house with, and it makes it more fire resistant. There are steps that people can take, and we can give our customers this advice. You just mentioned, I just wanted to touch on one final thing. You mentioned about catastrophes there. We recently had Hurricane Ida went through the United States, hit New Orleans really, really hard a couple of weeks ago. A lot of people had to evacuate their homes in advance of the hurricane hit. Got to see some of the aerial images. We actually got a whole bunch of aerial images taken right after the storm passed in order to quickly assess damage to Allstate properties so that we could get on the ball. Okay, let people know, yeah, your house is underwater. Let's start the claim process now. The quicker that we get the money paid out, the better for them. Also, the better for Allstate. It's a win-win. right? The quicker we can get this thing sorted. So we're having these images, we're getting them in, but also people have evacuated their homes. We're able to tell people, your house isn't safe to go back. Like, they have no idea. Like, they have no idea what's going on with their house. We were actually able to give some of our customers some of that information. That was huge for them. Able to tell certain people, yeah, you can go back. Your house wasn't touched so much. So that was just a huge win for just customer experience and providing value to our customers.
Yeah, and that is the power of AI, right? And that's what it can do: real-time, analysis of millions of homes or whatever, and let them know that they can go back. So the real, the good side of AI, I would say. So yeah, that's kind of wrapped it up in terms of what our personal projects. I wanted to end it with a bit of a discussion on something that is very future, because of the title of this topic obviously is the future of AI for insurance. And a huge one obviously in auto insurance is the ideas of self-driving cars. This is something that everybody in the world is thinking about, and it probably is on the same level of flying cars back in the day. It's when is this future going to get here? Is it going to get here? So I thought it'd be a good discussion for us all to have. If anybody in the audience wants to have a comment, please just shout it as well, and we can just talk about it. So here's just a few quotes from people out there that we would have known. So Elon Musk, for example, in 2015 said that self-driving cars could drive anywhere within 2 or 3 years. Obviously, it didn't happen. You can't trust much out of Elon Musk's mouth, but still. The Lyft CEO, which is similar to Uber in the US, if anybody doesn't know, in 2016 said that car ownership would all but end by 2025. That's 4 years away. Doesn't look like it's anywhere near. Even in the US, these companies, Uber, etc., are big, but they're nowhere near where they were. And now experts and people in the field are starting to be a bit more conservative about it and say, maybe it's not quite as close as we thought it was. There's accidents happening, etc. The AI isn't quite where we thought it would be. We thought there'd be more innovations, etc. So the question I kind of want to ask the panel is, how far do you think that future is away, or do you think it is ever going to get here?
I think Elon Musk changed his mind on that topic more than me, but
So he's got the stock price to care about of Tesla. So.
I think he released a tweet over the weekend, I think, where he basically said they were releasing a beta version for self-driving cars. I think there was a really, I don't know if you read it as well, but there was a really weird part of it where they were only releasing it for the really good drivers. You should probably release it for their bad drivers, right? I thought it was really strange. I think my take on it is that Elon Musk will probably be on Mars before I see a self-driving car driving up the Boucher Road. But and for the simple reason,
What about the Malone Road?
Maybe the Malone Road. For the simple reason being that I don't think human-driven cars and self-driving cars can be on the same road. I think there are certain niches where self-driving cars will drive, like a McDonald's drive-through, certain places like an airport, car parks, for example. I think they might pick up there. I think that, I suppose, the main challenge to getting self-driving cars out there is being able to generate or capture enough data for it. So there is probably 2 different ways you could go about training a car to drive. One would be you could try and mimic a good driver. What would they do in this situation? The other one is what we would call reinforcement learning, where it does the same thing over and over and over again. It makes a mistake, it learns from it. But what does that really mean? You need to knock a person down 10,000 times before you realize it's bad, right? And the way they kind of get around that is that they simulate that environment, and they can simulate a car driving through Belfast. But for me, I don't think that the simulations can ever get there. And people sometimes think you might have a game like chess or Go, been in I suppose it's been all over the news as far as AI is concerned. And you might think that, well, a computer can beat the best chess player in the world, why can't it drive a car? If you look at those 2 different environments, a chessboard's 64 squares, it's always going to be 64 squares. There's a set number of pieces, they can only move certain ways. When you go out into the real world, that environment just explodes up. There's so many degrees of freedom and places that can move in. So I think the main piece of holding it back is the actual simulation environments. If they can crack the simulation piece, I think they might have self-driving cars. But I would say probably, if you look at how long it's taking them to get diesel cars off the road, you're probably talking 2040, 2050. So
and so I suppose then maybe a better question, or another way to look at it, is what environment do you see, anybody in the panel, do you see self-driving cars being viable? Do you know, is it a certain city that adopts it, or a new city maybe that can just has enough money to pull all the other cars off and put all the good ones on? Will it be, you brought this up earlier, like would it be in a car park where you have certain cars that then you press a button and it'll just do it all for you until you get out to the certain point? Is there like an environment where you see it being viable in a big enough scale, or is it always just going to be like assisted driving type applications?
I'll have a go at that one. Back to the first question, I agree it's going to probably be a very gradual thing, and I think it will be predominantly driven by economics, less so than the luxury of being driven around. At the risk of doing audience participation, who has cruise control or lane assist in their car? If you could put your hand up. And keep your hand up if you use it regularly. Okay, so there was 1 out of about 8 to 10 people there, I would say. So, yeah, but I think when it becomes an economic proposition, for instance, if self-driving cars somehow become cheaper to buy than regular cars, or indeed if they're cheaper to insure than regular cars, which is definitely something that could happen in time. Cost of driving, people don't often really think about it, but it's one of the single largest costs in any family, in particular now where interest rates are so low. The cost of owning a home, the interest that you pay is typically actually a lot less than if you own 1 or 2 cars, and the cost of keeping them on the road. So difficult to say exactly when that transition will occur, but in terms of the kind of test beds for that, yeah, I think it'll probably be industry first. We already see in some cities delivery carts going along the sidewalks. It's not a major step up to think of vehicles on the road. And it's also the place where it's going to make most economic sense, where infrastructure can be changed such that it can be made safe enough. So if you think about our current infrastructure, it's completely designed around humans driving cars, not around machines driving cars. So the way we have traffic lights, the way we have signage, it's all based around humans observing that. The cost of changing that in a city might actually be relatively small, given the amount of traffic that occurs there and some of the benefits that you could have from self-driving in cities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it comes down to the city too. Like if you have one city that I see, for example, that I would imagine might do it, are the big US cities, like somewhere like San Francisco or something, where you have these tech hubs, and they have, like, California's income, GDP, is up there with some of the massive biggest countries in the world, so they have so much money that they could really pump it in and redesign entire parts of the cities and say, this is only for self-driving cars, or you need to, or you can't even drive your own car, you need to get an Uber or a Lyft, and it has to be a self-driving Uber or Lyft. That's kind of the part where I see you might get something, but it just seems, I'm from Magherafelt, if anybody else is from around here, there's not going to be self-driving cars in Magherafelt the way people drive around there for a very long time. So yeah, that's kind of my take on it, I think. And the insurance part, though, just to sort of cap it off, the insurance is kind of the interesting from our side. Like, what does insurance even look like with self-driving cars? Who are you insuring? Because you're not, the person is no longer liable because they're not touching the wheel. Like, that's what you insure. Most of the insurance that you pay for is for if you crash or somebody that you're driving with crashes into you. So, like, who are you insuring? Who do you insure? Are you insuring the company, the car manufacturer, the person, the software developers who wrote the code? Who are you insuring, and what does it do to insurance? Does it make it very cheap, or what do you think about that? Anybody?
I think it's like different because like car insurance is covered like you're in a car accident, but there are also other things. So like if your car gets crushed by like a tree, like you've parked it outside your house, there are other like elements like that aren't just like crashing. But I don't know, what are other people's like opinions?
Yeah, just quickly, the risk can be broken up into moving and non-moving. So obviously you would probably need this, if you wanted your comp, if you wanted your car fully comp, the optional part, you would probably have to continue to buy that, but it's much cheaper than the current product. The moving risk, the risk when it's driving, which is the main risk that you have, maybe that ends up getting picked up by the AI company or whatever. Maybe you have to pay a subscription to this self-driving thing, and that part of that is the insurance, because there's still going to be some accidents. There's still going to be some risk to other cars, but maybe they are also pushing updates and monitoring it and maintaining it in some way, and maybe it ends up being like a subscription like that you end up paying. But as everyone says, it's very far out. I don't know who really wants it so much that it's just a problem that people can imagine solving. It's easy to push the resources there, you know, with people more staying at home these days and not even driving as much and getting stuff delivered. I mean, you see maybe even less need for it now. And I gotta say, internally, we're talking about it less now than we were 5 years ago. It seemed to be the hot topic 5 years ago. Yep. It seems to be like just a topic these days. So
yeah.
We'll see how it goes.
Nothing, the proof hasn't been in the pudding kind of thing. So yeah, I think it'll probably come in hand with, you know, people not owning cars anymore, and it'll all be Ubers and Lyfts. That's kind of probably the future that allows self-driving cars to be prevalent. So I think we're out of time. I'm sorry, folks, I didn't leave any time for questions, but you can catch us after if you want to talk to us about anything. Just come up to us. We'll be around for a wee bit longer. But yeah, thanks so much for your time, and thanks for listening and watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.